weird, but I would literally channel Leonidas. I would almost do these meditations where I would feel him coming into me. Then I go, can I just try another one? That moment comes and I just go, this is Sparta. Gerard Butler carved the image of King Leonidas deep into the minds of millions with his thunderous roar. This is Sparta. But the brutal truth behind the film 300 was nothing like the dazzling glory on screen. Few people know that in order to create those immortal frames, Butler and the entire cast had to pay with blood, sweat, and even their sanity. Years later, as the curtain of secrecy slowly lifted, Butler admitted the set of 300 was no different from a savage battlefield where everyone was pushed to their absolute limits. The training sessions nearly destroyed their bodies, the skimpy Spartan costumes forced the actors to maintain flawless physiques, and the entire shooting lasted just 61 days. Was this truly the price to transform 300 into a legend? If you knew all of these truths, would you still dare to look at the film as mere entertainment? Join us as we delve into 10 shocking revelations from Gerard Butler behind this masterpiece. 1. The torment of injuries and emergency hospital visits. When 300 exploded on screen in 2007, audiences only saw the chiseled muscles, the fiery sword strikes, and the blazing Spartan eyes. Director Zack Snyder built a mythical and violent world, immersive and artistic. But behind the spectacular vision was a merciless reality. According to Gerard Butler, the set of 300 was not just cinematic glory, but a grueling stretch of injuries, exhaustion, and emergency hospital runs. In a brutally honest interview, Butler admitted, "I remember every day somebody went to the hospital." Butler shared, "You're fighting, you turn around. There's a guy down a spears in his eye. Another time you turn back, some guy's fallen, snapped his ankle. I mean, it was insane. Fight choreography might have looked neat and calculated on screen, but in reality, the physical demands often descended into chaos. The weapons, though dulled for safety, were still very real and carried serious risks. In one battle scene, a spear dangerously pierced straight into an actor's eye. In another case, an actor broke his ankle after a mistimed fall. These were not isolated accidents. The film demanded the actors perform dangerous stunts repeatedly while still weighed down by heavy gear and forced to move through confined spaces. There was no room for error, but injuries struck again and again. Outdoor shoots were another kind of torture. A segment filmed on the Icelandic Sea might have looked epic, but in reality, the actors had to plunge into freezing water that sliced like knives. Butler and many others suffered hypothermia to the point that their bodies had to be anchored to the seafloor to prevent being swept away by waves. What the audience saw lasted mere minutes, but the pain lingered for weeks. For 3 consecutive nights, the hospital became the crew's reluctant meeting point. On one occasion, right in the middle of a duel, Butler accidentally struck his co-star, breaking his arm. The phrase, "it's just a movie," quickly dissolved into harsh reality. Every sword swing could leave behind a real injury. In Butler's memory, it was the feeling of utter depletion physically and mentally at the end of every day. Despite the pain, the cast kept pushing forward. For Butler, embodying a Spartan king meant accepting the suffering that came with it. The scars and hospital visits were simply part of the price. What the audience saw as heroic and powerful was, in truth, born of relentless, dangerous working conditions. And if the injuries weren't enough, let's uncover the brutal physical preparation that began long before the cameras ever rolled. You'll be even more surprised. Chapter 2. Butler crushed in the training dungeon. The transformation into Sparta's warriors in 300 didn't begin with costumes or makeup. It began months earlier, deep inside the inferno of Jim Jones, the training dungeon where Gerard Butler and his co-stars were thrown into a regime so grueling, many described it as physical torture. To become the indomitable King Leonidas, Butler endured 7 months of non-stop training, 6 hours a day every day with no escape. These workouts were unlike any Hollywood boot camp. Nothing but sweat, groans, and sheer willpower stretched to the breaking point. High-intensity CrossFit, massive weightlifting, punishing circuits, staged sword fights drenched in the feel of real steel. The goal wasn't to look like warriors, it was to become warriors. It was a full-scale metamorphosis turning mortals into myth. Leading this ordeal was Mark Twight, the infamous trainer, a man who knew no mercy. Twight combined martial arts, weightlifting, CrossFit, and simulated combat, forcing the actors to shatter every limit. His philosophy was clear: either you rise or you break. In Twight's eyes, there was no room for weakness, not even if you were a Hollywood star. Even after filming began, the hell didn't end. Between takes, the actors were still forced back into heavy lifts, pull-ups, explosive jumps. Butler and the others weren't just sculpting muscles for display. They needed functional power, the ability to swing swords for hours, to charge enemy lines without gasping for air. They had to look like bronze statues, yet move like assassins, and the price was endless pain. Gerard Butler never hid the fact that his body nearly collapsed. Tendinitis ravaged his joints. His hips ached so badly he struggled to walk. His torn shoulder often made it impossible to lift his arm. Some mornings he woke up numb with pain but dragged himself out of bed because Leonidas could not fall. Exhaustion, fatigue, and injury became part of the Spartan identity he was embodying. His fellow cast members endured the same punishment. They weren't just lifting weights, they were flipping giant tires, sprinting through obstacle courses, cranking out hundreds of push-ups and pull-ups until their bodies shut down. Martial arts drills were repeated so endlessly that sometimes no one could tell rehearsal from real combat. The goal wasn't to play warriors. The goal was to live as warriors, one member confessed. This vicious cycle stretched through the entire production, by day fighting on camera, by night training to maintain the Spartan form. Pain layered upon pain, bodies never fully healing before being thrown back into torment. Butler later admitted that it was this very agony that fueled the intensity of his performance. "If I didn't feel like my body was being ripped apart, I couldn't have lived Leonidas truthfully," he said. When the 300 workout was officially revealed, it became legendary. Thousands around the world tried it, most quitting halfway. Only after Butler's confession did people realize what turned him into the Spartan King was not just muscle, but spirit, the willingness to sacrifice, endure, and turn suffering into glory. That is what etched 300 into cinematic history, and what made its behind-the-scenes story as epic and tragic as the film itself. Years have passed, yet the fire of 300 still burns like a Spartan torch at Thermopylae. And perhaps most extraordinary is how 300 changed Gerard Butler's life forever. But in what way? Chapter 3. A 180-degree turn in Gerard Butler's career. Before 300, Gerard Butler was like a flame waiting to be lit. He had appeared on screen in Reign of Fire timeline, and most notably in The Phantom of the Opera in 2004, where he left a faint impression as the tragic Phantom. But Hollywood still hadn't lifted its head to look at him. Butler was like a warrior standing outside the gates of glory, always waiting, always yearning for the moment that would change everything. That moment exploded in 2007, when Butler donned the blood-soaked crimson cape of Sparta. With 300, he didn't just play Leonidas, he became Leonidas. A king who emerged from the shadows of history, carrying with him a fury and authority that silenced the world. The line, "This is Sparta," rang out like thunder, piercing through theaters, shooting straight into the veins of the audience. That wasn't acting, it was a declaration of war against Hollywood itself. The resounding success of 300 transformed Butler from a forgotten name into a global phenomenon overnight. Filmmakers saw in him a star capable of carrying blockbusters. Audiences saw a new action idol, while the press rushed to hail him as the face of masculinity's revival on the silver screen. Butler was no longer searching for opportunity, he was the opportunity. But what made this journey even more dramatic was Butler's astonishing versatility. Immediately after roaring on the battlefield of Thermopylae, he stepped into P.S. I Love You alongside Hilary Swank, a romantic role tender, gentle, full of emotion. Fans were stunned. Could a blood-soaked warrior truly transform into a sweet lover? It was precisely this contrast that prevented Butler from being shackled to the image of Leonidas, opening a rare and